The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by 3 additional police cars and 2 news vans. The small street corner had transformed into a circus of flashing lights, reporters, and growing crowds of curious onlookers. The paramedics immediately attended to Eleanor, carefully checking her injuries and preparing to transport her to the hospital. Mike stayed by Eleanor's side as the paramedics worked. "Mrs. Watson, I'm going to make sure you get the best medical care possible," he told her gently. "Don't worry about the costs or anything else." Eleanor squeezed his hand weakly. "Mike, you've already done more than enough. You don't need to worry about an old lady like me." "You're not just any old lady," Mike replied with a warm smile. "You're someone who stood up for what was right when it would have been easier to walk away. That takes real courage." The paramedics determined that Eleanor had likely suffered a mild concussion from her fall, along with several scrapes and possible bruising to her ribs. Her left knee was swollen and would need X-rays to rule out fractures. Police Captain Rodriguez arrived on the scene and immediately took control of the situation. She was a 20-year veteran of the force and had dealt with high-profile incidents before. The first thing she did was separate Martinez and Wilson, ordering them to wait in separate patrol cars while she assessed the situation. Captain Rodriguez approached Mike respectfully. "Mr. Tyson, I'm Captain Rodriguez. I sincerely apologize for what happened here tonight. Can you tell me your version of the events?" Mike appreciated her professional demeanor. "Captain, I was simply helping Mrs. Watson carry her groceries home. Your officers approached us and immediately assumed I was some kind of threat. When Mrs. Watson tried to explain that I was helping her, Officer Martinez became aggressive with both of us." By now, several reporters had arrived and were setting up cameras. Mike could see them interviewing witnesses from the crowd, and he knew the story was already spreading across social media and news outlets. Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Mr. Tyson, I want you to know that this behavior does not represent our department's values or training. We will conduct a thorough investigation, and if our officers acted improperly, they will face appropriate consequences." While the captain spoke with Mike, the paramedics were preparing to transport Eleanor to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. She looked small and fragile on the stretcher, but her eyes were still bright and alert. "Mike," she called out as they wheeled her toward the ambulance. "Will you visit me in the hospital? I'd like to properly thank you when I'm feeling better." "Of course, Mrs. Watson," Mike replied. "I'll check on you tomorrow." As the ambulance drove away, Mike felt a mix of anger and sadness. Anger at the officers who had caused this situation, and sadness that an innocent elderly woman had been hurt simply because she had defended him. The media presence was growing by the minute. Mike could see reporters from major news networks setting up for live broadcasts. Social media was exploding with videos of the incident, and hashtags like #Mike Tyson protects elderly and police violence were already trending. Reporter Sarah Chen from Channel 7 News managed to get close enough to Mike for an interview. "Mr. Tyson, can you tell us what happened here tonight?" Mike looked directly into the camera. "I saw an elderly woman struggling with heavy groceries, so I offered to help her get home safely. That's something my mother taught me to do. Help people who need help, especially our elders who have given so much to our communities." "What was your reaction when the police arrived?" Sarah asked. Mike's jaw tightened slightly. "I tried to cooperate fully and explain the situation calmly, but Officer Martinez had already decided what he thought was happening, and he wasn't interested in listening to Mrs. Watson or me. When he started getting physical with a 73-year-old woman, I couldn't just stand by and watch." The interview was being broadcast live, and Mike's words were being shared across the internet instantly. The story was resonating with people because it touched on several powerful themes: police brutality, the treatment of elderly citizens, and the idea of a celebrity using his fame to protect someone vulnerable. Captain Rodriguez completed her preliminary investigation by interviewing several witnesses from the crowd. Their accounts all supported Mike's version of events. The video evidence from multiple phones clearly showed Officer Martinez being the aggressor throughout the encounter. District Attorney Jennifer Martinez received a phone call at home about the incident. despite sharing a name with the involved officer. They were not related. As she watched the videos online, she knew immediately that criminal charges would likely be filed. "This is exactly the kind of case that undermines public trust in law enforcement," she told her assistant. "An officer attacking an elderly woman and then assaulting Mike Tyson while cameras are rolling. We'll need to move quickly on this." Back at the scene, Captain Rodriguez made the difficult decision to place Officer Derek Martinez under arrest for assault. The decision was unprecedented in her 20-year career, but the evidence was overwhelming. "Derek Martinez, you are under arrest for assault in the second degree," she announced as she approached his patrol car. "You have the right to remain silent." The crowd cheered as Martinez was handcuffed and placed in a different police vehicle. Officer Wilson was suspended pending investigation, though witnesses had noted that he had tried to de-escalate the situation. Mike watched the arrest with mixed feelings. He took no pleasure in seeing anyone's career destroyed, but he also knew that accountability was necessary to prevent future incidents. A young man from the crowd approached Mike hesitantly. "Mr. Tyson, I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. My grandmother is about the same age as Mrs. Watson, and seeing how you protect him." As Martinez raised his baton for another strike, a voice from the crowd cut through all the chaos like a knife. "That's Mike Tyson!" The words seemed to freeze everyone for just a moment. Several people in the crowd turned to look more carefully at the man who had been helping Eleanor. Someone else shouted, "Oh my God, it really is him." Martinez hesitated, his baton still raised. He looked at Mike with new eyes, trying to process what he was hearing. The name Mike Tyson meant something, even to someone like Martinez who wasn't particularly interested in boxing. Wilson's eyes went wide as recognition dawned on him. He had been a boxing fan in his younger years, and despite the years that had passed, there was no mistaking those distinctive features. "Derek," he said urgently, "put the baton down, now." But Martinez was still caught up in his adrenaline-fueled rage. Even if this was the famous boxer, he had committed himself to this course of action, and backing down now would make him look weak. "I don't care if he's the president," Martinez snarled. "He interfered with police business." Mike straightened up despite the pain in his back and shoulder. The secret was out now and everything had changed. He looked directly at Martinez with eyes that had once struck fear into the hearts of heavyweight contenders around the world. "Officer," Mike said, his voice now carrying a different kind of authority. "You need to stop this right now, before you do something you can't take back." The crowd was buzzing with excitement and disbelief. People were pulling out phones not just to record police brutality, but to capture video of Mike Tyson being attacked by police officers. The story was already spreading across social media at lightning speed. Eleanor, still on the ground and bleeding, looked up at Mike with new understanding. She finally recognized the face that had seemed so familiar. This was the man who had been one of the most famous athletes in the world, and he had stopped to help her carry groceries. "Mike Tyson was helping me," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The former heavyweight champion of the world was carrying my groceries, and this officer attacked both of us." Martinez felt the situation slipping away from him completely. The crowd was growing larger and more hostile. People were shouting at him from all directions, and he could see the phones recording everything. But instead of backing down, his pride made him double down. "I don't care who he is," Martinez said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had before. "Nobody's above the law." Mike took a step closer to Martinez, and for the first time the police officer felt a chill of real fear. Even at 57 years old, Mike Tyson was still an imposing figure. His shoulders were broad, his arms were thick with muscle, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of decades of combat experience. "You're right," Mike said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Nobody is above the law, including police officers who assault innocent elderly women." Wilson was now thoroughly panicked. He knew that assaulting Mike Tyson would make national news. Their careers would be over and they might face serious criminal charges. The video evidence alone would be enough to destroy them. "Derek, we need to call for backup and medical assistance right now," Wilson said urgently. "This has to stop." But Martinez's pride wouldn't let him admit he had made a mistake. Instead, he made the worst decision of his career. He lunged forward with the baton, trying to strike Mike again. This time, Mike didn't just dodge. 40 years of boxing training kicked in automatically. He caught Martinez's wrist in mid-swing, stopping the baton inches from his head. His grip was like a steel vise, and Martinez immediately realized he had made a terrible error in judgment. "I really don't want to hurt you," Mike said, his voice deadly calm. "But if you swing that thing at me again, I'm going to defend myself." Martinez tried to pull his arm free, but Mike's grip was unbreakable. The police officer's face began to turn red as he struggled against the former champion's superior strength. Kyating. Crowd was going wild. People were cheering, shouting encouragement to Mike and calling for Martinez to be arrested. Someone started chanting, "Tyson! Tyson! Tyson!" Eleanor managed to pull herself into a sitting position against a nearby wall. Despite her injuries and the shock of everything that had happened, she felt a surge of satisfaction seeing Mike take control of the situation. "That's right, Mike," she called out. "Don't let them bully you the way they bullied me." Wilson made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Mike, please let him go. We'll sort this all out. Nobody else needs to get hurt." Mike looked at Wilson with respect for the first time. At least this officer seemed to understand how serious the situation had become. "Officer Wilson," Mike said, having read the name tag, "I'm going to let your partner go. But first, Mrs. Watson needs medical attention. She's hurt and she needs help right now." Wilson nodded quickly. "Absolutely. I'll call for an ambulance immediately." Mike slowly released Martinez's wrist, but he stayed close enough to intervene if the officer tried anything else. Martinez rubbed his wrist, shocked by the strength he had just experienced. "Mrs. Watson," Mike said, turning his attention to Eleanor. "How are you feeling? Can you move okay?" Eleanor smiled despite her pain. "I've been better, but I'll survive. Thank you for protecting me, Mike." The crowd was still growing, and Mike could see news vans beginning to arrive in the distance. He knew this incident was going to be huge news, but his primary concern was still Eleanor's well-being. "We need to get you to a hospital," Mike said, kneeling down beside her. "You took a hard fall, and I want to make sure you're okay." Martinez stood to the side, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. He had assaulted an elderly woman and attacked Mike Tyson, all while being recorded by dozens of witnesses. His career was over, and he might be facing criminal charges. Wilson was on his radio, calling for supervisors, medical assistants, and additional units. He knew they were going to need all the help they could get to handle the crowd and the media attention that was coming. As they waited for the ambulance, Mike stayed close to Eleanor, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. The crowd had formed a protective circle around them, and people were sharing water and offering jackets for Eleanor to sit on. "Mike," Eleanor said softly, "thank you for not losing your temper completely. You could have really hurt that officer." Mike nodded. "I learned a long time ago that violence should always be the last resort, but I wasn't going to let him continue hurting you." The ambulance sirens could be heard in the distance, and Mike felt relieved that Eleanor would finally get the medical attention she needed. But he also knew that this incident was just the beginning of a much larger story that would capture the nation's attention. The tension on the street corner had reached a breaking point. Officer Martinez's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment as more people gathered to watch the confrontation. The whispered comments from the crowd and the sight of phones recording the incident only made him more agitated. Eleanor stood her ground, despite being faced with an increasingly hostile police officer. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Officer, I'm asking you again to please leave this young man alone. He was helping me, nothing more." Martinez felt like he was losing control of the situation entirely. In his mind, both Mike and Eleanor were making him look foolish in front of a crowd. His training should have told him to de-escalate, but his pride and anger were making the decisions now. "Ma'am, I'm ordering you to step back and be quiet," Martinez said, moving closer to Eleanor with an aggressive posture. "This is police business." Mike watched Martinez approach Eleanor and felt every muscle in his body tense. His protective instincts were screaming at him to intervene. but he knew that any sudden movement could make the situation even worse for both of them. "Officer, please," Mike said, his voice still controlled but with an edge of warning. "Don't take this out on her. She's just trying to help." But Martinez was past the point of listening to reason. The crowd, the cameras, the defiance from both Mike and Eleanor had pushed him over the edge. In his twisted thinking, he needed to show everyone who was in charge. Eleanor saw Martinez reaching for something on his belt and instinctively took a small step backward. But instead of backing down, she raised her voice so that everyone in the growing crowd could hear her clearly. "Everyone can see what's happening here," she called out. "This police officer is harassing an innocent man who was helping me with my groceries. I want everyone to witness this." That was the final straw for Martinez. Being called out publicly by an elderly woman in front of a crowd of witnesses triggered something dark inside him. Without warning, he grabbed Eleanor's arm roughly. "You're under arrest for interfering with police business," he snarled, twisting her thin arm behind her back. Eleanor cried out in pain and surprise. At 73 years old, her bones were fragile, and Martinez's grip was causing immediate discomfort. The crowd gasped collectively, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Hey," Mike shouted, his calm finally breaking. "She's an elderly woman. You can't treat her like that." Wilson finally found his voice. "Derek, let her go. She's not doing anything wrong." But Martinez was too far gone to listen to his partner. The adrenaline was pumping through his system, and he felt like he was in a fight for his professional life. Instead of releasing Eleanor, he tightened his grip and began pushing her toward the police car. Eleanor stumbled, unable to keep up with Martinez's forceful pace. Her shopping list fell from her pocket, and her purse slipped from her shoulder. The pain in her arm was sharp and getting worse, but worse than the physical pain was the humiliation and fear. "Please," she gasped, "you're hurting me." The crowd was getting more agitated, with several people shouting at the officers to stop. Someone yelled, "She's an old lady," while another voice called out, "This is police brutality." Mike couldn't stand by and watch anymore. Despite knowing the risks, he stepped forward. "Officer, please, you're hurting her. She hasn't done anything wrong." Martinez spun around, dragging Eleanor with him. "Stay back or you'll be next." But his sudden movement caused Eleanor to lose her balance completely. She fell hard onto the concrete sidewalk, her knees hitting first, followed by her hands as she tried to break her fall. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. "Oh my God," someone shouted. "He just threw down an old woman." Eleanor lay on the ground for a moment, dazed and hurt. Her knees were scraped and bleeding, her palms were torn from hitting the rough concrete, and she was struggling to catch her breath. The fall had knocked the wind out of her, and she felt disoriented and scared. Mike immediately moved toward Eleanor, but Martinez blocked his path. "I warned you to stay back." "She's hurt," Mike said, his voice rising with anger and concern. "She needs help." Martinez saw Mike's approach as a threat and reacted instinctively. He raised his baton and struck Mike across the shoulder, causing the former heavyweight champion to stagger backward. The crowd erupted in shouts of outrage. "That's assault! Call for backup! Someone call an ambulance!" Wilson was now thoroughly alarmed. The situation had spiraled completely out of control, and he knew they were going to face serious consequences. "Derek, stop. This has gone too far." But Martinez wasn't listening to anyone. The crowd's anger was making him feel like he was under attack, and his training was telling him to maintain control at all costs. He turned back to Eleanor, who was still on the ground trying to get up. "Get up," he ordered, reaching down to grab her arm again. Eleanor was disoriented and in pain. The fall had aggravated her arthritis, and she was having trouble putting weight on her left knee. "Please," she whispered, "I think I'm hurt." Instead of calling for medical assistance, Martinez grabbed Eleanor under her arm and roughly pulled her to her feet. She cried out in pain again as he forced her upright. "You brought this on yourself, lady," Martinez said coldly. The crowd was now hostile and growing larger. More people were recording the incident, and several had called 911 to report police brutality. The situation was attracting attention from blocks away as word spread through the neighborhood. Mike was holding his shoulder where the baton had struck him, but his focus was entirely on Eleanor. Seeing the elderly woman being manhandled was triggering every protective instinct he had ever developed. His mother had always taught him to respect and protect elderly people, and watching Eleanor being abused was unbearable. "Officer, please." Mike tried one more time, his voice now pleading. "Look at her. She's bleeding. She needs medical attention, not arrest." Martinez turned back to Mike with fury in his eyes. "You want some more?" He raised his baton again, preparing to strike. Eleanor, despite her pain and fear, found her voice. One more time. "Don't you dare hit him again," she shouted with surprising strength. "He was trying to help me." But Martinez was beyond reasoning. The crowd, the defiance, the loss of control had pushed him into a dangerous state of mind. He swung the baton again, this time aiming for Mike's head. Mike ducked, avoiding the worst of the blow, but the baton caught him across the back as he moved. The impact sent a sharp pain through his spine, and he stumbled forward. The crowd was now in an uproar, with several people moving closer despite the danger. Someone was shouting for the officers' badge numbers, while another person was live-streaming the entire incident on social media. Wilson made one last attempt to stop his partner. "Derek, we need to call this off right now. We're going to be in serious trouble." But Martinez was too far gone to listen to warnings about consequences. In his mind, he was fighting for his authority and respect, and he wasn't going to back down now. That's when something unexpected happened that would change everything. The police car pulled alongside Mike and Eleanor as they reached the corner of Maple Street. The sudden appearance of the flashing lights startled Eleanor, who instinctively moved closer to Mike. She had lived through decades when police presence in her neighborhood meant trouble, and old habits die hard. Officer Martinez stepped out of the car with his hand resting on his belt. His posture was aggressive, and his eyes were fixed on Mike with obvious suspicion. Wilson followed reluctantly, wishing they had just driven past the scene. "Hold it right there," Martinez called out loudly, causing several pedestrians to stop and stare. "Let me see some identification and step away from the lady." Mike felt his stomach tighten. He had experienced situations like this before, and he knew how quickly they could escalate. Years of therapy and personal growth had taught him to stay calm, but the protective instinct he felt for Eleanor was strong. "Good evening, officers," Mike said respectfully, slowly reaching for his wallet. "I'm just helping Mrs. Watson carry her groceries home." Eleanor looked confused and frightened. "Officers, what's the problem? This gentleman was kind enough to help me with my shopping bags. He hasn't done anything wrong." Martinez ignored Eleanor's explanation, focusing entirely on Mike. "I said step away from her, now, and keep your hands where I can see them." "Officer, there's really no need for this," Mike said, carefully placing Eleanor's shopping bags on the ground. "The lady can tell you herself that I was just helping her." But Martinez was already in confrontation mode. He had made up his mind about what he thought he was seeing, and nothing was going to change it. In his experience, big men in this neighborhood usually meant trouble, and he wasn't going to take any chances. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Martinez asked Eleanor, but his tone suggested he had already decided she wasn't. "Did this man approach you? Is he bothering you?" Eleanor's voice became stronger despite her confusion. "Officer, you're making a mistake. This young man saw me struggling with my bags and offered to help. He's been nothing but polite and respectful." Wilson could see that the situation was getting out of hand. The elderly woman was clearly defending Mike, and there was no evidence of any wrongdoing. But he had learned not to contradict his senior partner in public. "Look, let's just check your ID and we'll sort this out," Wilson said to Mike, trying to de-escalate the situation. Mike slowly removed his driver's license from his wallet. As he handed it over, Martinez grabbed his wrist roughly. "I said keep your hands visible," Martinez snapped, twisting Mike's arm unnecessarily. "Officer, please," Mike said calmly, though his jaw tightened. "I'm cooperating fully. There's no need for force." Eleanor couldn't believe what she was witnessing. In her 73 years, she had seen her share of injustice, but this was happening right in front of her to someone who had shown her nothing but kindness. "Officers, stop this immediately," she said, her voice becoming firmer. "This man has done nothing wrong. I'm the one who can tell you what happened here." But Martinez was beyond listening to reason. The adrenaline was pumping, and he felt like he needed to maintain control of the situation. In his mind, Mike's calm demeanor was actually suspicious. Why wasn't he more nervous? Why wasn't he showing proper fear and respect? "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Martinez ordered. "For what?" Mike asked, still trying to remain calm. "What law have I broken? What crime am I being accused of?" Martinez didn't answer the question. Instead, he grabbed Mike's shoulder and spun him around roughly. "I said turn around. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Eleanor stepped forward despite her fear. "Officer, this is completely inappropriate. You can't just grab someone for helping an old lady with her groceries." "Ma'am, please step back," Wilson said, gently trying to guide Eleanor away from the confrontation. "Let us handle this." But Eleanor wasn't going to step back. Something inside her had awakened, a strength she hadn't felt in years. This reminded her of the civil rights era, when she was a young woman and witnessed countless examples of people being mistreated simply because of how they looked. "I will not step back," she said firmly. "This man was helping me, and you're treating him like a criminal. What's your badge number? I want to report this." Martinez felt his authority being challenged by both Mike and Eleanor, and it made him angrier. In his twisted logic, they were both being disrespectful to his position as a police officer. "Lady, I'm trying to help you here," Martinez said, his voice rising. "This guy could be dangerous. You don't know what his intentions were." "His intentions were to help me carry heavy bags because I'm an old woman who was struggling," Eleanor replied, her voice now shaking with indignation. "Something you should understand if you had any decency." The crowd of onlookers was growing larger. People were pulling out their phones, and Martinez could hear whispered comments from the gathering crowd. This made him even more defensive and angry. Mike remained as calm as possible, but he could feel the situation spiraling out of control. He had learned from experience that any sudden movement or raised voice could be used as an excuse for violence. But he was also worried about Eleanor, who was putting herself at risk by defending him. "Mrs. Watson," Mike said gently, "please don't put yourself in danger for me. I'll be fine." But Eleanor had found her voice, and she wasn't going to be silenced. "No, Mike, this is wrong, and I won't stand by and watch it happen." Martinez had heard enough. In his mind, both Mike and Eleanor were challenging his authority, and he felt like he needed to reassert control. He moved closer to Eleanor, his face red with anger. "Lady, you need to back off right now, or you're going to have problems too." The threat was clear, and it hung in the air like a dark cloud. Wilson looked uncomfortable, knowing that threatening, an elderly woman was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and looked Martinez directly in the eyes. "Are you threatening me, officer?" An elderly woman who was just trying to get her groceries home. Yeah. Confrontation had reached a dangerous turning point, and everyone present could feel the tension crackling in the evening air. The sun was setting over Brooklyn, casting long shadows across the busy streets. Mike Tyson walked slowly along the sidewalk, his hands deep in his jacket pockets. At 57 years old, the former heavyweight boxing champion had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. The neighborhood had changed a lot since his childhood days, but he still loved coming back to walk these familiar streets. Mike had just finished dinner at a small restaurant nearby. The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, always made sure he got his favorite meal whenever he visited. She remembered when he was just a young, angry kid from the streets long before he became famous. Now people still recognized him, but they were more respectful, more understanding of the man he had become. As he walked, Mike thought about his life journey. He had made many mistakes in his younger years. The fame, the money, the pressure of being called the most feared boxer in the world had nearly destroyed him. But time had taught him valuable lessons about humility, respect, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The evening air was cool, and the street was moderately busy with people heading home from work. Children played in small groups near apartment buildings while their parents watched from windows above. Street vendors were packing up their carts, and the familiar sounds of city life filled the air. Mike noticed an elderly woman struggling with heavy shopping bags about half a block ahead. She looked to be in her 70s with gray hair tied back in a neat bun. Her clothes were simple but clean, and she wore comfortable walking shoes. She kept stopping every few steps to rest, clearly exhausted from carrying her groceries. Mrs. Eleanor Watson had lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years. She had raised 3 children here, buried her husband 5 years ago, and now lived alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. Every Tuesday evening, she walked to the grocery store to buy food for the week. Her social security check didn't allow for much, but she managed to get by. Eleanor had always been independent. Even at 73, she refused help from her grown children who lived in other states. She believed in taking care of herself and not being a burden to anyone. But lately, the shopping trips had become more difficult. Her arthritis made carrying heavy bags painful, and she often felt dizzy after walking long distances. Mike watched as the elderly woman stumbled slightly, catching herself against a lamppost. His first instinct was to help, but he had learned to be careful about approaching strangers. Sometimes people got nervous or excited when they recognized him, and he didn't want to cause any trouble. However, something about the woman's struggle reminded him of his own mother. Isabella Tyson had worked multiple jobs to support her family, often coming home exhausted, but never complaining. She had taught Mike that helping others, especially those who were vulnerable, was one of life's most important responsibilities. The former champion quickened his pace, deciding to offer assistance. As he got closer, he could see the woman was breathing heavily. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool evening air. Her shopping bags contained basic necessities: bread, milk, canned goods, and what looked like medication from the pharmacy. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mike said gently, approaching from the side so he wouldn't startle her. "Would you like some help with those bags?" Eleanor looked up, surprised. She saw a tall, well-built black man with kind eyes. There was something familiar about his face, but she couldn't quite place it. In her generation, she had been taught to be cautious of strangers, but something about this man's gentle manner put her at ease. "Oh, that's very kind of you," she replied, slightly out of breath. "These bags are heavier than I expected. I might have bought too much today." Mike smiled warmly. "No problem at all. I'm heading in this direction anyway." "Where do you live?" "Just 3 blocks that way," Eleanor pointed down the street. "In the brick building with the blue door. Are you sure you don't mind? I don't want to trouble you." "No trouble at all, ma'am. My name is Mike." He gently took the heaviest bags from her hands. "These are pretty heavy. You did some serious shopping today." Eleanor felt immediate relief as the weight was lifted from her tired arms. "Thank you so much, Mike. I'm Eleanor Watson. I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. I don't think I've seen you around before." As they began walking together, Mike shortened his stride to match Eleanor's slower pace. "I grew up not too far from here, but I moved away for work. I come back to visit sometimes. It's nice to see how the neighborhood has grown." Eleanor studied his face more carefully as they walked. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before? Maybe I knew your mother or father?" Mike chuckled softly. "Maybe. Brooklyn's not that big a place. Everybody knows everybody somehow." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Eleanor appreciated having someone to walk with. The street seemed safer with a companion, and Mike appeared to be a gentleman. She noticed how he stayed on the street side of the sidewalk and adjusted his pace to hers without making her feel rushed or embarrassed about walking slowly. "Are you married, Mike? Do you have children?" Eleanor asked, making conversation. "I have children, yes. They're grown up now. Family is everything, you know. Taking care of the people you love, making sure they're safe and happy." Eleanor nodded, approvingly. "That's wonderful. Family is the most important thing in life. I have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. They live far away, but we talk on the phone every week." As they continued walking, neither of them noticed the police car that had been slowly following them for the past block. Inside the vehicle, 2 officers were having a heated discussion about what they were observing. Officer Derek Martinez had been on the force for 8 years. He was known for being aggressive and having little patience for people he considered troublemakers. His partner, Officer James Wilson, was newer to the job and often went along with Martinez's decisions to avoid conflict. "Look at that," Martinez said to Wilson, pointing at Mike and Eleanor. Big black guy following some old white lady. She looks scared. Wilson squinted through the windshield. I don't know, Derek. They seem to be walking together normally. Maybe he's helping her with those bags. Are you kidding me? Look at the size of that guy. She's probably too afraid to run. We need to check this out.